Yo, what is going on, everybody? We're talking meta. This is going to be my second video on the tier list before the new box that's coming out, hopefully in a week or so. Our first tier list video was after 3 or so tournaments, so the data was definitely scuffed, but we wanted to do a little prediction, see what kind of decks were going and what direction. Now we've had a whole week of tournaments. We just had a $100 tournament battle phase. So we got a better idea of where kind of everything is sitting with the game. And I wanted to just kind of sit down and talk about the different decks, my opinions on the different decks, my tier list and how it's changed, and kind of how the meta is shifting while we go into the next box. The meta is extremely healthy, and it does feel like anything can win right now, so I'm very certain that the next box will have meta impact just because everything is at similar power level, so it should make the balancing game extremely easy for Konami. So the biggest tournament we had, Battle Phase, $100 tournament. You can see Mech Knights, Infernoids, Salamangreats, the 3 most entered decks, a whole bunch of other decks just to get out of the way. Right off the bat, the Relinquished Structure deck, no, it is not good. It is not meta relevant. I'm sure it's coggable. Every deck is coggable, but as far as competitive Duel Links goes, it has no impact on the game. So we're not really going to talk about that structure deck if you're going to ask about that. Going into the top 32 breakdown, we had 6 Infernoids. Infernoids have had a fantastic week and has really kind of shown itself to be an extremely powerful strategy. It's really their trap card. Their trap card is probably the best trap, like individual trap in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links right now. Being able to summon a whole bunch of monsters that then have a whole bunch of effects that are extraordinarily powerful, popping back row, stopping, just straight up negating monster effects, removing cards in the graveyard, is extremely powerful. And really, the only 2 things that are kind of limiting the deck right now are consistency, because if you don't get a Void Feast kind of line of play going, the normal summon 1 Decatron doesn't do this deck a whole lot of justice. So that's really the only thing that's inherently stopping it. And then this deck can lose to Mech Knights. Thinking of Dark Lords on the mind. I apologize, folks. Mech Knights, they do have their Legacy, which can stop, obviously, all the monster effects from activating. The effects do activate on the field. Even though they tribute for cost, they are activating on the field. But, with that trap on the field, they can completely stop you from doing that. That being said, talking about Mech Knights are still extremely relevant in the top 8. Their weaknesses, of course, if they lose, their back row to an MST or whatever. We actually saw in this tournament, the highest placing Mech Knight player ended up losing because he had to set his Book of Moon just to create, a column in order to summon in on his opponent's side by giving him by surprise present, and then later when he got assault mode, he needed it for a play, ended up setting it, it got MST'd, and he had no columns to summon anything. So Mech Knights and Infernoids kind of leading the charge with how many tournaments they've done very well in, but both decks still having clear weaknesses. Super cool to see even the strong decks have clear weaknesses. Salamangreat had an extraordinary tournament this time around. Other tournaments, not so much, but this tournament, it did very well. Ended up actually winning the whole thing. It was Trains versus Salamangreat in the grand finals, and it was quite easy for Salamangreat to take down Trains, if I'm being completely honest with you. Salamangreats, they are, like I put a video up before, they are still an extraordinarily good deck. I wasn't 100% sure if they would still be meta relevant or if they would stay tier 3, but they have kind of shown up this week, so happy to see that. We never want to see decks, at least I never want to see decks completely drop out of the meta after a nerf. I would just want them to be balanced and fair. Obviously Salamangreat got hit with heavy nerfs, but, counter argument, they were tier 0, so they needed heavy nerfs in order to be brought back down to an appropriate power level so other decks have a chance. to kind of face off and do what they need to do. So I'm happy to see, I'm happy to see that it's still able to win tournaments and kind of prove to people that if you did spend your money on Salamangreat, you didn't waste your money. The deck still has a lot of resources to play through Disruption. The deck still can make Xyz plays. Ningirsu and Needle Sealing are pretty much carrying the deck right now, and Balinix Protection. But hey, it is what it is. We take what we can get around these parts. Burning Abyss, that's another deck I wanted to talk about. Burning Abyss has had a horrible week. And it really did kind of show that people were just kind of misplaying into Burning Abyss. And now that they've kind of wisened up, Burning Abyss has kind of fallen by the wayside. Not too much to talk about when it comes to Burning Abyss. And then Trains, of course, getting to the grand finals, I think it's just a byproduct of this metagame and kind of the meta that we are in is anything can win, right? So any good deck can win with enough luck, with enough a good seeding, a good top cut, etc., etc., etc. So let's talk about the actual tier list. I have something I'm doing a little bit different than what I normally do. I'm going to have my tier list from before and my tier list from after, and kind of again explain my reasoning and why I have, each deck in its place. And of course, I've listed why I put everything in its tiers. I feel like the community as a whole, Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole, not just Duel Links, kind of just puts tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, just kind of throws it out there with no real thought. So I'm clearly explaining my thought, reasoning, and why I put certain decks where. So again, just to go over them, tier 1, I expect a high percentage of top 8. So when I say high percentage, I mean 3, 4, 5, 6, a lot of the top 8 is that tier 1 deck. I expect, and then a very high chance to win it all. So chances are, if you're rocking with this deck, you have an extraordinarily high chance of winning the whole tournament. Tier 2 is a good percentage. So, we're thinking about 3 or so, top 8. Decent chance to win it all. So there's still a chance that if you enter with this deck, you have a chance to win it all. And then low top 8 for tier 3, you might see like one of these decks in the top 3, but you do still have a chance to win it all, if everything goes according to plan. And then good decks, or the rogue deck category, whatever. These are still good decks that you can see in tournament play, and you will probably see in tournament play, so you should definitely prepare for them in tournament play, but, are not considered part of what I would consider the meta, with, giving you the highest chance of getting top 8 and winning the entire tournament. So let's talk about tier 1 real quick. Before I had just Mech Knight. Now I am going with Mech Knight and Infernoid. I think Infernoid is an extremely powerful strategy, even with the consistency issues. And I think more importantly, Mech Knight is not as strong that it kind of stops the entire meta from joining other decks in tier 1. Infernoid has had a fantastic week in getting multiple top 8s, and has won and or been in finals of other tournaments this week. Most importantly, the top 8 conversion rate has been very, very, very good on this deck, which is really cool because this deck is also extremely free to play friendly. It may not be the most fun deck to play, maybe not the most exciting to figure out, but I do think its strategy is very good, and even though it does pretty much lose in the straight Mech Lord or Mech Knight, there's too many mechs, Konami. Change the names of the cards; they keep tripping me up. Mech Knight cards, even though inherently they lose that matchup, you can side deck to stop Mech Knights without really, any really crazy things that you have to do with your deck. And overall, I just think that these kind of two decks are kind of going head to head when it comes to top 8 percentage and then what's winning in tournaments right now. Tier 2, I put Salamangreat. Now, this might be a little confusing because if you watch my last video, you were like, oh man, Salamangreats might actually fall off the tier list. But no, I mean, the deck is so resilient. Like, it has so many resources per turn that it's able to just sit and grind you out with needle ceilings and Ningirsus and just not dying. They'll literally I've literally watched people sit on like a defense mode Gazelle, protect it with Balinks, and then next turn they have an OTK play. Salamangreat still have all of the offensive capabilities Salamangreat used to have. but they just don't have a good turn one anymore. Their turn one is still dog shit. There's nothing you can really do about that. But the follow up OTK is still definitely there, and I'm happy to see it for them. I do think that Salomon Great is not necessarily a good deck to go into right now. I do think if you had it before when it was tier 0, you could still play it, and that's good. But I wouldn't go into it now just in case there's further nerfs or something else comes out, because it does feel like it's on the cusp of being power crept, but it is still viable for this meta specifically. Next up, I have Tier 3 Code Talkers and Burning Abyss. You could see that both those decks got knocked out of Tier 2. These decks just simply have not had a really good week this week. I feel like Burning Abyss, again, I talked about it last week. It's a deck that's not really that great. I just feel like people are misplaying very heavily into it, and the deck punishes misplays very, very easily. So once people kind of stopped doing that, it didn't do as well as it did. It is still part of the meta. You do still see a ton of them, and they do still get top 8 quite frequently. You'll see 1 or 2 in top 8 almost every tournament. But, we saw some interesting side deck choices. We saw XC's Encore pretty much shut down the entirety of BA. It was able to return Beatrice, summon out the monsters from the graveyard, or summon the monsters that were attached. They didn't get their effects, and change their levels so you can't even XCs with them anymore. So that card alone is basically an FTK against Burning Abyss. So we'll have to see if they're able to do anything against that. And then Code Talkers, just, it's a very strong deck, and the strategy is very strong, but unfortunately it just wasn't able to put up the numbers. It just cannot face that. Mechlord and Infernoid and Salad specifically are just able to play through all the disruption that they have, and still have enough resources to win the game. So had to drop them down. Took off the tier list. We took off Phantom Knights and Mermail Water. Mermail and Water definitely feels more like a rogue deck now. It isn't doing too crazy. And then Phantom Knights, we talked about it last week on the video. Phantom Knights kind of rise when the meta is not settled and everything is messy and everyone's playing whatever they want, because they're a very solid choice. They can play whatever back row. They're the back row deck, right? So now as the meta is settling and kind of the top 3 decks, Mechlord and Infernoid Salads, are kind of showing up, Phantom Knights don't really have a place in the metagame anymore. So we went ahead and dropped those down to rogue level as well. And that's pretty much the only update I have for the tier list update. You guys let me know how Duel Links is going for you guys. I'm still enjoying this meta quite a bit, even though it has pretty much settled down. I don't think it's going to settle any further. Of course, the new box is coming out, and hopefully the new box can just add another deck. Ideally, a deck with like tier 2, tier 1 potential. I wouldn't want it to go any stronger. I wouldn't want any of these decks dying because a new deck comes in. I am enjoying that there are multiple free-to-play decks on the tier list right now. It hasn't been like that for a while, so I am very happy to see that these decks are also extraordinarily cheap. That's going to be it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Till the next one, peace out, boys.